All right. Housing impacts nearly every part of our financial lives, yet most people only think about it when they're building or selling a home. And the reality is, housing affordability, inventory, regulations, and community planning all shape long term financial stability. So, what's driving Minnesota's housing challenges and what happens if we don't solve them? Welcome to Paladin Financial Talk. I'm your host, Nikki Foley, and I'm joined by featured guest Mark Foster of Housing First Minnesota. This is Minnesota's trade association for residential builders, remodelers, developers, and building industry suppliers. Housing First Minnesota brings the housing industry together to advocate for housing and homeownership, and our industry leaders who are dedicated to building safe, durable homes at prices Minnesotans can afford. So, welcome, Mark. We're so glad that you're joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to the conversation.
So, Mark, I'm going to have you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about you here in just a second. But you're the Vice President of Legislative and Political Affairs for Housing First Minnesota. And you've been doing this for over a decade. This is what you have been doing. But tell me a little bit about you. Walk me through your world and what you're so passionate about, why you've been doing this so long.
Well, I just think it's a great cause. We're advocating for the next generation of home buyers to have a chance to buy a house. We're advocating for property rights, for the opportunity, for ownership, for everybody across the state. So yes, yeah, I've been with Housing First Minnesota for over 10 years, and it's just a great line of work, advocating, like I said, for home buyers and opportunities.
And you just came off of the legislative session. So when we talk about you're in the mix of this, you're spending time in St. Paul and you're really on the ground floor making things happen. Is that fair?
Yes, no, session just wrapped over the weekend. It was an active session, a very busy session, as most of them are, but a good session overall for the housing industry.
Well, fantastic. Well, as we intro what we're doing here, Mark, we are doing a financial planning podcast. So somebody might be saying, well, why are we talking about housing as it relates to financial planning? And really, retirement planning is our ultimate goal. And so most people think 401ks, Social Security, investments, but one of the biggest pieces and often overlooked is housing and the role that it plays in somebody's financial planning journey. And so what we're doing with this series is we're bringing knowledge leaders together to talk about what's going on in real estate, housing, and this area of the industry. And so what I want to do today is just examine some of the challenges that Minnesota's may be facing right now related to housing, the role your team is playing, and just get back to the individual of what's in it for the individual and why are we having this conversation. And there may be things that you say that I am just not familiar with, and so I'll ask for clarifying. But ultimately, housing plays a big piece in somebody's overall assets, and so that's why you're here today. And we'll start navigating this together. So let's dive in. If
Yeah.
we're excited to hear your perspective. So, starting with, what are some of the biggest challenges that Minnesotans are facing right now as it relates to housing?
Yeah, no, that's a great lead-in question, and, the biggest challenge is it's rather simple, actually. It's simply that Minnesota does not have enough homes at price points that enough people can afford, and that shows up in many ways with higher rents for renters, higher home prices for those trying to buy a house. There's fewer starter homes than we had generations ago, and ultimately also fewer options for seniors that want to downsize. And so we're dealing with the ripple effects of higher interest rates, which obviously fluctuate a little bit, construction costs, a labor workforce shortage, infrastructure costs, insurance costs, but ultimately regulatory and policy expenses are one of the biggest drivers that we have the ability to change over time. And I know we can dive into that a little deeper, but ultimately when demand is strong, it becomes difficult to build housing at prices everyday Minnesotans can realistically afford. So it's affordability is really a supply and demand issue. And when we don't build enough housing, prices rise and options shrink.
Some of those challenges that you talked about, they all feel really big, and yet you still came in with policy drivers as part of that, which just not even on honestly on my radar. And it's all how the way you see the world and the lens that you're looking through. So you mentioned a few things like not enough homes, price points that are affordable. Those are the basics. But is this impacting a certain population or certain group more than others, or does it kind of run the gamut?
That's a great question too, and I'd say it largely probably impacts the ends of the spectrum. Those that are trying to get their foot in the door, first-time home buyers, they're probably hit the hardest because they don't have that existing home equity to build upon that move-up buyers have, or those that have owned homes for, say, 30, 40 years. So working families, first-time home buyers, probably feeling the worst of the blow. But at the same time, like I mentioned, retirees and older adults, they're facing a little bit of a different challenge, but in that they want to downsize or move into lower maintenance homes. And those options can be hard to find as well. And so there's just not enough affordable options, enough options in general to the masses.
Yeah, we were talking about before we started on the show is you think about retiring and you think about downsizing and you would think that a smaller price point goes along with that, and that's not necessarily the case in some areas. Well, you named some big roadblocks previously. Those seems like enormous hurdles. Like are there movement towards more affordable housing, or is there so much right now that is standing in the way? That kind of, what is your gut feeling on this?
Yeah. So, just from the capital perspective, there is movement. Housing and housing affordability and the housing shortage as a whole continues to elevate as a top tier issue for both the public and for voters. And I'd say policymakers are starting to pay attention to that. And so, like I said, from the capital perspective, you're starting to see a growing coalition that is made up of all sorts of groups that frankly, they don't agree on 9 out of 10 issues, but on this one public policy issue, housing, they come together on. And so that coalition, it's called the Yes to Homes Coalition. It's the spectrum of politics from left to right to everything in between, is actively advocating to remove some of these roadblocks. And then there are bipartisan legislators and policymakers that are looking to do so as well. And so that's the exciting piece of this. We have it here locally in Minnesota, but it's also becoming more and more of a national theme.
Fantastic. That does make me feel optimistic as you share that there is the movement and it is becoming a top tier topic. Well, let's talk about what is Housing First Minnesota doing to address some of these challenges and improve housing opportunities across the state. If you will dig in and give us some perspective.
Yeah. So, us at Housing First, we're the home builders, the remodelers, the development community that builds these homes and brings housing units online. And our one core goal is helping to create housing opportunities for Minnesotans at every stage of life. And so, like I said, a big part of that work is bringing together builders, remodelers, local leaders to have practical conversations about how we can do that. How can we increase housing supply? How can we improve affordability? And so at the Capitol, I lead our lobbying efforts to advocate for policies that reduce some of these unnecessary barriers to building homes. And so just to give you a few examples of that, that includes supporting efforts that streamline approvals, making the building process faster, expanding opportunities for starter homes, improving housing choice, and also reduce regulatory costs that get passed on to consumers. And a lot of the regulations approval process. I want to be careful in framing this because many of these regulations were created with good intentions. Communities, of course, care about safety, infrastructure, design standards, quality of life. But over time, layer after layer of these requirements can significantly increase the cost of housing. And so I'd say this is it's many, many years, if not decades, of small, like I said, well-intended policies that have added up. And now many policymakers and much of the public is asking the question, do we need all of these, or can we pull back a few things in order to find some cost savings?
Yeah, reminds me of our tax code. You just keep adding to it and not taking away. So is there movement from that perspective that things will start coming out, or is that a harder hill to take on than we realize?
Well, anything, worth doing takes usually a little bit of time to come across. But, I will say there are a lot of city governments that have looked meaningfully inward at some of their policies over, I'd say, probably the past 3 to 5 years for sure. The many cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, city of Bloomington's they've all gotten some gold stars over time, looking to see, okay, what can we do to improve our policies to allow, say, more duplexes, more ADUs, more flexibility in doing a tear down. So there are definitely a handful of cities that have done so as well. And then at the same time, at the state level, there, like I said, we're making progress on what's called the Minnesota Starter Home Act. And there was a provision that's signed into law just this past session that will, it's part of a larger bill. It was the HOA omnibus bill, got a lot of public attention over the past couple of years, but this provision would allow our members, the development community, to have flexibility in whether they really need to create an HOA. And that has some cost savings for anybody that is buying into that type of environment as well.
You answered a couple of my questions, probably unintentionally there, but are there regulations or approval processes that have popped up or that may be unintentional that are making things more expensive and harder? And it sounds like, yeah, it's been something that has built over time, and all of a sudden we're jumping through lots of hoops to get where we need to go, and that's starting to come back, and they're looking at that if that's necessary. So that's fantastic. Other things that are happening, or does that give a pretty good broad summary?
That's a good summary. I'd say, the movement, the policy changes are happening a little slower than we might care for, but they are slowly happening. Just a couple other examples. We have some growing communities within the metropolitan area primarily that basically require a 3-car garage. And 3-car garage is happy. All my members would be happy to build it if that's your choice. But to have that as the base level it's a significant cost driver when you add in the land, the labor, and then the materials behind that. And we just believe that should be an option for home buyers rather than having City Hall tell you must have a 3-car garage.
That's so good to help bring this conversation to life of what we're talking about. Do you have any, I'm putting you on the spot here, but other examples like that so people have some perspective on what's happening?
Another one that we point to quite often are design aesthetic standards.
Okay.
And so that can be a certain type of siding required on a house, and if depending on the upgrade on that can be tens of thousands of dollars a house. So I mean, by the time you do a 3-car garage with certain types of design upgrades, you're talking $50,000-$60,000, and that's your price difference on whether you're able to get your foot in the door as a young freshly married 20 something, or and maybe you're a single person on one income that's trying to get their foot in the door. And that's, again, happy to do it if that's your choice, but leave that to the home buyers to choose.
Yeah, what good perspective. So you mentioned the Minnesota, I think it was the Minnesota State Home Act. Other legislative things that priorities right now that are really being focused on that are worth bringing in to our conversation?
So within the Minnesota Starter Home Act are a number of provisions that would remove some of those standards on design aesthetics. It would also lot size is a big thing when it comes to cost drivers, and so allowing greater flexibility on on how much lot you have. And actually, that's what most home buyers are asking for, is just a smaller lot. They don't want to maintain. They don't want to necessarily have to mow the lawn as frequent, or a large lawn as frequently, all the snow removal and the like. And so that would provide some cost savings. Like I mentioned, we have a lot of national members that build product at a 1-car garage, and it's fantastic. It serves a purpose, but they can't build it here in Minnesota. They can build it in basically every other major metropolitan area across the Midwest and most parts of the country, but not here in Minnesota.
Talk more about why. Why is Minnesota different than these other locations?
That's a great question. We like to be a little different, a little quirky on a lot of things. But I think it is our unrelenting yielding to to local government and just kind of the power dynamic at play between those that have lived in the community, have always seen it this way, and don't want change. The farm field across the street's always been that way. Well, it's about to change because families want to move into your community, and that's a great thing. That's a great thing. Most communities should want to embrace that for property tax revenue, for growth in schools, and just for all the great reasons that you see new housing come online. But that's when you get into the micromanaging and tinkering of what these homes look like. And, unfortunately, there are some cities and some communities where the NIMBYs say some things at the public hearings around these that just make you uncomfortable for sure.
You've probably heard as you talk about people, and oftentimes someone's best trait is also their worst trait, and vice versa. So whatever that may look like, I almost heard that in the same way. One of the best things about Minnesota is I think people stay, and if people go away, they come back because Minnesota's home. But oftentimes that can lead to what you described as set in their ways. This is how it's always been. And so having you guys as advocates to present an open mindset and advocate for some of these things for affordability as one of the biggest drivers is it's a good thing.
Yeah, no, and what we ultimately advocate for day in and day out is to try to have as healthy of a housing market as we can here in Minnesota and in the metro. And like I mentioned earlier, that's just having options for folks. And I always ask, different generations, obviously the first time buyers, the younger buyers that they experience it firsthand trying to get in the door. But ask the older generations, hey, could you afford your house today? Also, do you want your kids and grandkids to be able to live in the same community that they grew up in or that you live in today? And so with that comes options. And, like I mentioned, duplexes are options, ADUs are options, more multifamily in certain settings. Those are, typically rental options, but we all rent at certain stages of life as well. And so just having those options for wherever you're at on your housing journey.
What's the worst case here if we don't do something, if we don't make progress?
You can point nowhere else but the coast, primarily California, also the East Coast. Those are your worst case scenarios. I will say some of those states have recognized that their housing costs have gotten out of control and that normal people, your teachers, your firefighters, your nurses, can no longer afford to live in the communities that they work. And so that's that. Look there if you want a shining bright star of what not to do. We're not there yet in Minnesota, thank goodness, and we still have opportunities to try to change some of that. But we're a real challenge compared, like I said, to a lot of our peers in the Midwest, and our wages aren't much higher, if any higher, than some of the Midwestern peers in Indianapolis and Chicago, in Kansas City, and so. We still have time. We can still fix a lot of things, but let's not become the next coast.
Yeah. So the call to action sounds like somewhat be mindful. Like all of us have a responsibility along the way. And sometimes this side of it is out of sight, out of mind. You don't think about other than what's right in front of you and your opinion on things, but zooming out and taking a step back and seeing what obstacles and roadblocks might come about if we stay stuck in our mindsets, and pointing to the coast gives good perspective.
And all of that makes sense too, right? If you haven't bought a house in 10, 20, 30 years, you may not recognize it. And as a homeowner, as homeowners love to see that equity grow. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that, but we need it to grow at a sustainable level where other generations also have an opportunity to do very similar things, to establish roots in a community, to have a place for their kids and grandkids to grow up.
Yeah. Shifting the focus a little bit to more of a segment here. What about Minnesota's housing market as it relates to an aging population? Because simultaneously, boomer generation, people are aging, and that goes alongside some of these other challenges that we're talking about. Is there anything Minnesota really is doing to support that community and the need for housing for that age?
No, for sure, a ton. That's a big product, that a lot of my builders and developers wanna, provide for, and, more Minnesotans want, homes that are accessible. I have to give a shout out for my wife as an occupational therapist, so, that's a
Yeah.
it's a big priority. Accessibility, lower maintenance, like I mentioned early on, with lawn care, snow care, and the like, obviously located near healthcare, shopping,
Mhm.
family, is all important things. So we are increasingly recognizing that demand, but there's still barriers to building enough of those housing types at reasonable price points as well.
Uh, some of the pieces that you brought up there, the accessibility and access to nearby healthcare, those are conversations that, I just was speaking with one of our clients, and they're have a new grandbaby, and where their daughter lives is outside of the metropolitan area, and that's one of their concerns is if they get outside of this area, will they have access to healthcare? So, and accessibility, I mean, 90% of our individuals that we work with, they want to age in place and
Yep.
they don't want to be a part of a community. They want to, stay in their home. And so, wow, to exclamation point on those points and what you're describing. So, let me ask the next question. What about builders and how they come into this? Because it seems like building costs are also significant. And so, it seems like we talk about up to this point, we've talked a lot about getting into a new home, affordability of moving, but it seems like building or adding on or changing your existing
Mhm.
home is just really prohibitive sometimes.
Yeah, no, for sure. All makes sense. It's all a challenge. And I will say a lot of those older generations, they're staying in their homes a lot longer
Mhm.
than they used to. And if that's their preference, that's great. But also that has impacts to the overall housing continuum and the cycle, the churn of housing, where if you have a 65, 70-year-old in a five-bedroom, three-bath house that should be opening up to a growing family, it causes consequences all throughout. And so, no, just having some of those villa type products are very attractive to the older generations. But then, yeah, also the remodel are always an option.
Yeah. Do you think that Minnesota has enough homes for the aging population?
Well, Minnesota is going to continue to age quite a bit, I think, over the next
Yeah.
decade, and so probably not at this moment, no. And in terms of the overall picture, I don't think I've dropped this number yet, but the state of Minnesota has an approximate $100,000 or 100,000 unit shortage, and that's inclusive of all housing, for what would be considered a healthy housing market where the supply to demand um, equilibrium is found. And so, and that would include everything: senior housing, rentals, single family, townhomes, the whole gamut.
I'm putting you on the spot for comparison. How does that compare to our neighbors, say, Kansas City, Des Moines, Midwest?
Per capita, it's one of the more challenging ones. It's not
Mm,
the worst. There's definitely places throughout the country that have bigger problems,
yeah.
but here in the Midwest, we're one of the greatest challenges.
So, as we look to the future here, what would you say a lay person like myself should be paying attention to? And what are some of the impacts that we as individuals can have on all of this?
Yeah, one, it would be to, yeah, just like I said, put yourself in the shoes of a home buyer today, rather you actually are in the market yourself, or if your kids or grandkids are in the market, understand the challenges that they're facing. I know we like, as intergenerational warfare, you like to talk about interest rates and everything, what it was, 16, 20% back in the day, but the housing costs are a lot more as a whole for the younger generations today. So I'd pay attention to the conversations happening within your community around zoning reform, around permitting. When new housing's coming online within your community, like I said, embrace it. That's a good thing. It could be your next house, your next option that's getting built. And so, the increasing discussion, it's only going to amplify. Like I said, I know there was a statewide poll done just recently that had housing as the number 6 issue for Minnesotans. When I started with Housing First 10 years ago, I don't even know if it registered as a top 20 issue.
Yeah.
So it is continuing to elevate. And I think that's going to continue.
So, Mark, what I heard you say is really it kind of comes down to the basics of leave out some of the detail that you may or may not understand about the housing market. Come with an open mind and walk in somebody else's shoes, put yourself in somebody else's perspective. And so as things come up and as this becomes a bigger topic in your community, just embrace the discussion and be an active part of it, and aim for looking at the bigger picture, and if change is necessary, be a part of it.
And ultimately say yes to more homes. It's a good thing. That's, like I said, that's the coalition name is Yes to Homes. And just allowing for more options, allowing more homes to be built in a faster amount of time at more attainable price points gives all of us better options, and will help we reach that equilibrium that we so desperately need in Minnesota for the housing market.
Yeah. And, one perspective, one lens to look at this, and the what's in it for me perspective is, if you look at somebody's assets and that nest egg they have, the housing piece of it makes up a big portion of it for most people. Between a 401k or a retirement account and housing, that's in the majority. And if we don't take action, and if we aren't mindful of some of our perspectives, that keeps ballooning inside of the nest egg and taking up more and more. And so that it brings it back to the individual of, why is this conversation important, and our perspective along the way.
Yeah.
Do you have any? Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, no. I mean, home ownership's everything. That's why we're so passionate about what we do at Housing First Minnesota. And like you said, housing affects every person's financial life. And I can't remember the stat, but if you compare someone that rents for 30, 40 years compared to a homeowner that buys a house for 30, 40 years, their overall equity or their overall portfolio is often 20, 30, 40 times more than that. And so, and ultimately too, it's just the stability, it's the community roots that you establish when you own a house.
Yeah, which comes back to the overall longevity of somebody, is having community and being an active part of something bigger. Would you have any recommended resources for me if this was something that I've enjoyed the conversation? What are something maybe that you follow or you think that I would be able to pick up on that's good to continue this conversation, a resource?
Yeah, no, for sure. It would be to join us at housingfirstmn.org. That's where we have our member resources, but then also have updates about what is happening in the state, what is happening in your community around home building, around the industry, around the market. But then it'd also be to join your local YIMBY group, your Yes in My Backyard as well, and to support us in the Yes to Homes cause. So yes2homes.org would also be another option.
Great. Well, we will put those websites on our paladinfinancialtalk.com website so that they're easily accessible for those that are listening today. One of the things that we always make available to our listeners for each series is a download. And this series we're offering, Should I Pay My Mortgage Off Early? It's a flow chart that's designed to help make some decisions around the conversation we've been having over the last month here. So that's a download that you can access at paladinfinancialtalk.com. But really, some of the resources that you just shared, I would encourage to go out. So whether it's the housingfirstmn.org or the Yes to Homes, we'll make sure all of that's available for our listeners. And so if you're listening today and you have sat here and said, my gosh, this sounds like me, or I'm interested in this conversation, take a moment to go out to our website, go to paladinfinancialtalk.com and book a 15-minute no obligation conversation to see where the housing piece fits into the overall financial picture. And you can always reach us at 651-842-8406. You can see Mark's information on our website. Follow us on social media as well. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and more. Also access that download of Should I Pay Off My Mortgage Early on our website. Mark, is there anything else that you want to wrap up with today?
Yeah, it's for Minnesota, for the future of the state, figuring this out is very important, and I think we will. I think we will. Like I said, it's just taking a little longer at times, but I think everybody recognizes the importance of housing, of home ownership, and wanting to draw people to Minnesota, wanting to keep them here, like you said. And so communities grow and thrive when people are moving, when we're building in communities. It's always an exciting time for that neighborhood.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing individually as well as Housing First Minnesota to be a part of these conversations. Thanks for being our guest today. And with that, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on our next episode.